official opening plenary event. Today, with human ingenuity in climate action, stories from across the nation, I would like to introduce the two moderators for that session, who will then in turn introduce the panel. The first moderator is the fourth co-chair of the program of the steering committee for the National Adaptation Forum, Michael McCormick, formerly with the state of California. Now he is the division president / strategic advisory services lead of Harris and Associates. And EcoAdapt's own Jessica Hitt, lead scientist and CAPE program manager. Please come up and share with us the stories of adaptation.
Good morning, everybody. How's everybody feeling today?
Good morning.
So we're here to get you ramped up for the rest of this week. It's going to be a great week. So I've been a part of the National Adaptation Forum since the beginning. It's been a really exciting 8 years, I guess. And one of the things that I really took away from the first National Adaptation Forum was the final plenary, where we all came together to make commitments to each other for what we were going to do when we got back to our home states and our home cities and where we worked and what we did. And I stood up with the executive director of the local government commission and said, you know what, next year we're going to do a California Adaptation Forum. So I think that was one of the first regional forums that came out of this National Adaptation Forum ecosystem that's been created. Look, it's really pushed the community of practice in California forward. The National Adaptation Forum has really pushed the community of practice forward across the U.S. And it's made a personal impact on my life, and it's created meaning in what I do throughout my career. So I may be in private consulting now. I was working in the governor's office in California for the past 8 years, leading land use and climate policy, really exciting work. But what I noticed was that there was a disconnect between what was happening in the private sector and what public agencies and NGOs are really trying to push forward and accelerate in our ecosystem of people, practitioner community, right? So one of the things I'm experimenting with in the private sector is how do we do unique partnerships and create relationships that extend beyond fee-for-service contracts and create true public-private partnerships. And I think this is one of the secrets of this forum, is the diversity of membership and participation in this group allows us to go back home and really create unique partnerships and connectivity moving forward. I'm the board president for a nonprofit that's part of a regional climate collaborative in California. We had a great regional convening yesterday. And I think one of the things that we're talking about today in our group here is robust incrementalism. I should probably trademark that term. Look, we never feel like things move fast enough. We are all struggling to make progress as fast as we can, and we're all struggling with that. Part of these discussions at these forums are to help inspire us to move forward through the year, but it's also to understand that sometimes you have to be pragmatic, you have to be careful, you have to be thoughtful, and sometimes there's leaps of progress forward, but most of the time it's just incremental. So that's why I say it's robust incrementalism. So on that, I'm going to hand it over to Jessica, but thank you so much for being here. This is going to be an exciting discussion, and I'm glad you all made it. I think it's 9:30 in the morning? That's good. All right.
Awesome. Welcome, everybody. As Laura said, my name is Jessica Hitt. I'm the program manager for the Climate Adaptation Knowledge Exchange, or CAPE. We come into your news, to your inbox monthly with a slice of cake. So I work primarily on that. I was also a lot of the legwork for the first National Adaptation Forum, including Googling how do you find a hotel for a conference. But we moved far past that, and we're now at our fourth Adaptation Forum, which is a huge success and really exciting to see so many new faces here. So we have a fabulous group of speakers this morning for our adaptation storytelling session. And the goal of this session is really kind of to kick off the week. And what we want to do is with this storytelling session is, I'm not sure how many of you are perhaps maybe the only person in your organization who works on adaptation or climate, or who has spent a lot of time explaining and maybe re-explaining what you work on, how it relates to different sectors, different people's jobs, people who think sustainability means adaptation means whatever, and your friends maybe still don't get it. Or there's some of us, including myself, who work kind of at the field level, and we produce these products for the field, reports. We spend countless hours. We work on 60, 70-hour work week, and we put these things out into the ether. And is it actually making a difference? Is anyone using this stuff? Or some of us work at the very local scale, and we're really struggling on the ground to make impacts in our community. And you're working, but you're not actually sure if the dial is being moved forward. Is this part of a sum of something? Is there a collective, actual body of work that's going forward? And kind of what we wanted to do today is, looking around the table, as we just did during icebreakers, we're among our peers. We're among the coalition of the convinced in many ways. These are folks, we don't need to go over the dire impacts. We don't need to show you all the climate change impact slides. But what we all are here is we're waking up every morning and doing this work. And it's often very, very taxing. We understand what we're up against, and we understand our limitations better than anyone else. So what we really want to do this morning, and what I find most inspiring about the work I do, kind of working with folks on a national level, kind of talking to someone from California one day and South Carolina the next day, someone who works on water resources, climate justice, public health, kind of every different day. And what I find most inspiring about this is our collective ingenuity is one of the greatest assets we have as a group of folks. It's our grit, it's our creativity, it's our ingenuity. It's really the idea that we are all waking up every day and putting in those extra hours to actually move the dial forward. I know I'm not alone in working overtime, or no, I'm not alone in sometimes being overwhelmed and not sure if we're actually doing something. So what we wanted to do today is actually kind of fill you up with some of the adaptation stories. I'm frequently inspired by the things I see going on. I see, someone from one sector or one geography taking something they heard at a conference like this or a connection and actually using those connections and those stories and that experience to actually move their own work forward and in turn move the field forward. So what we wanted to do is actually kind of with this panel is help us find kernels of inspiration or things that kind of fill your cup as you move away from this week. Things that fill your cup besides the drink tickets, which there will be copious amounts on tonight. But find that actual inspiration and things that kind of inspire you, those connections that will keep you going throughout the year. So without further ado, I want to introduce our first speaker, Queen Quet. Do you want to come up? Queen Quet is the chiefess of the Gullah Geechee Nation and was homegrown on the Sea Islands. She's a computer scientist, a mathematician, a historian, environmental justice advocate, an author, and the artist. She was elected the head of state for the Gullah Geechee Nation and fights daily to ensure the continuation of her native cultural heritage, which has made her community not only a place she treasures, but an internationally recognized cultural landscape. Queen serves on the NAP Equity Committee. She's spoken on behalf of her people before the United Nations in Geneva, at the Global Action Summit last year, and has received countless recognitions. Among one is the General Assembly of South Carolina recognized her with a resolution for the work that she'd done on behalf of her home state and the Gullah Geechee people locally, nationally, and internationally. Today, her story focuses on sea level rise, adaptation, and the Gullah Geechee Nation. Please give a round of applause for Queen.
Just a little while longer, hold on. Just a little while longer, hold on. Just a little while longer, everything why be alright. On a chill on fight on. Just a little while longer, fight on. Just a little while longer, fight on. Just a little while longer, everything why be alright. Gonna chill on everything, why be alright. In the morning, everything, why be alright. We did it. One nation show. And Gullah Geechee Nation. Especially out for these young teamwork. Then called hurricane and things like that and come in from Jacksonville, North Carolina, down to Jacksonville, Florida. And we just studied on what we did it for the show in the kind, for the show water rise. We ancestors, we did it through all of this show. For the show thing we called weather channel, been wrong. Somehow they didn't pick up. Somehow they did it. It's steady, like we beach ready, American beach. Like we had us, we ancestors were, come in, true, Solomon Island, where we the march now. For all of them, moved up on the shoreline. The giant behind the, they attribute to who we are, and things like that. 4 others of people first below said we did it, tall. Now they came now on all our stuff. No trying to shell back tall. We have to come back there. Saying well, we have to throw back people in time. But yet, what we the crack with people and things like that. A plenty of time when they came in, then I study about who we got. They stay a little bit, or we come down and go on body buttons. And no say, what it take for we gas out these young men and go out thrown in the creek and have a going further and further as time is going on. But get us to leave it for the family, for hold on, and for keep his soul nourished, much less their belly. So we don't study about this young thing, then I go on adaptation. We say what it is. We don't got no water for this young. But then people are kind of when they come out and we grab all the thing, if they come out Jonah, but now on something, go on devil grab the thing like that. We want to maybe got the devil even, but then they say, well, great God, we never see such a thing like this. Brother was saying, dear son. And we said, well, how they that did from y'all? And they go, huh? And we said, oh, that's right, y'all don't talk like we do you?
Right.
So we know you're not from these sea islands where these trawlers have gone out so extensively from around the world that they've done what we call derby fishing. And then on top of what they do, we see the storms opening up areas that were marsh and turning them into just waterway. And then we formed the Gullah Geechee Fishing Association because we know what's at risk. That our community, our cultural heritage is at risk. And so we continue to stand on those shores from Jacksonville, North Carolina, down to Jacksonville, Florida, on the sea islands, working with new partners to say, what is adaptation? Because as I said to you, in my language, there is no such word. But yet we've seen the sea levels rise. We live on islands, so it rises every day, right? So that made no sense to anybody there. What do you mean telling us the sea level is rising? Till we saw it on the road. In the middle of the day, no hurricane. We saw the hurricane push up the sedge of the marsh onto the land. So we said, oh, this must be what they're talking about. Now, while they're dealing with trying to adapt, we're trying to fight off offshore drilling, seismic gun testing, because water for us is sacred. It is a spiritual place. It nourishes not just the body, but your soul. That's where we pay tribute to our ancestors. That's where the family still gathers and we Londonly chilling and think, how to do what we've been to do for over 400 years there. But when we've been to crack with tea like Alicia, they didn't understand us. Then we started speaking like this and they still didn't understand us when we said don't build in certain places. Because it's not, as that word in your language says, sustainable. Then they said, well, y'all are just emotional natives. What do you know about it? I said, the fact that I farm the land, I live on the land, all of my generations back to the 1600s means nothing. Well, let me go with these people on the national platform and see what adaptation really means. Because then when I got there to Denver, they told me, you all are adaptation. You all are resilience. You are subsistence. You are sustaining the coast, these barrier islands that protect all of this that's inland. But until people can speak the same language, they'll never truly over or understand what is truly at stake. So I pray that today we do rise, just like the sea levels are doing, but together in one unified voice that truly says that we are doing actions today for a better tomorrow, so that at some point we can have the final National Adaptation Forum, and then we can pour libation this way instead of still having to pour it this way in celebration that we've achieved what we need to, and that the world is healed, the land is healed. And as I say, one must take care of root to heal the tree, and we'll know that those fruit from the tree are healthy. Take it. God bless all 100 children. Hope you join me on the porch for yet more of what is going on.
Okay. This one. Okay. Thank you so much for that inspiring beginning to the day. I'm pleased to now introduce Cynthia Naha. She's an enrolled member of the Hopi tribe from First Mesa in Tiwa Village. She's also from the Yahankawan Dakota Oyate, also known as the Yankton Sioux tribe. She lives in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and works for the Santo Domingo Pueblo as their natural resources director. She works within the Santo Domingo community, which allows her to connect to the land, to the water, the local environment, and the culture. She has a long history of focus on partnerships, working across tribes to make a difference within their communities, and she's going to be talking about the circle of resilience. Cynthia, please join me.
Good morning, everybody. Can you hear me? I was introduced, I'm Cynthia Naha, and I'm very pleased to be here and honored to actually have been chosen to be an open plenary speaker and to bring to the national level what we're coining as the circle of resilience. And we're looking at it as a resiliency, as a reservation, because here in the United States, we are confined to our reservations. So as we look at adaptation, or more specifically resiliency, because we have been resilient since the day dating back to our ancestors and to time immemorial, and all the different changes and things that we've experienced throughout the years and generations has allowed for us to continue to be resilient today. So when I look at the Pueblo model of adaptation, what I'm doing is I'm going from that global model to a Pueblo model, which is looking from inside my community out versus outside in. One of the things that I find challenging is when we deal with a lot of this adaptation talk or vulnerability assessments, it's really scientifically based. But what about the people that are land-based, that are connected to our environments, that are connected to our water, that are connected to the plants, to the animals, everything within our tribal communities that you see? That is who we are as land-based people. That is who we are as indigenous peoples, who are very much indeed connected to the earth that we walk on. So for those of us that do the work with moccasins on the ground, we're making sure and ensuring that as we move forward and we're looking at these concepts of resiliency, that we're understanding our community, we're understanding our people, we're understanding that language, ceremony, song, dance, even traditional clothing is very vital and alive in the 21st century. And as we continue to address resiliency within our communities, we're keeping in mind those traditional stories. We're keeping in mind our clan systems. We're keeping in mind our connection as ranchers, as farmers, as cultural leaders, as everything and anything that's tied to within our community. And I know it was mentioned earlier that what we do to the environment, we do to ourselves. So at some point in time, it's up to us as the generation now to really be mindful of our actions today, because they will have an impact tomorrow. So again, as we start to address resiliency within our tribal communities, within our homelands, it's making sure that we have that very connection to the earth, to the water, to the air, and to everything that enables us to be here today. I've been fortunate enough to have worked with climate issues since probably the early 2000s, when I started with Black Mesa Water Coalition, and we looked at it through the lens of climate justice, especially coming from indigenous communities where we have mining happening all around us, where we have, when you look at federal Indian law and policy, and you look at the reservation era, and what the federal government did was put us on reservations that were desolate, arid pieces of land, which they thought were. Now you come to the 21st century, where now we have fracking in and around our communities. We have oil and gas development that are nonstop. And if we look at resiliency, what enables us to have that resiliency factor within our communities? What do we need to do to not only enable our generation today, but to enable the generations for the next 7 to come? And so as I stand here before you, I think about the work that I'm doing in Santo Domingo, not just in Santo Domingo, but in New Mexico and all across the Indian country. Because those connections and working relationships that we make amongst each other is vital to the work that we do today. And it's going to be more important to the work that comes after we're gone. So again, as we look through the lens of, I guess if you will, that anthropogenic lens of climate change, what do we need to do to alter our lifestyles, to change the way that we look at the world, and most importantly, what do we need to do today to be a good ancestor to the next 7 generations to come? Thank you.
Thank you so much. Okay, our next speaker is Dr. Cruz. Richard Cruz is a professor in agronomy at Iowa State University and the director of the Iowa Water Center. He served as the president of the National Institute for Water Resources from 2015 to 2016. Dr. Cruz's research focuses on quantifying water-driven soil erosion rates as affected by rainfall, soil type, soil slope, and management. He is the co-leader of the Daily Erosion Project, a project estimating soil erosion losses across sections of multiple Midwestern states. He's based in central Iowa, which is part of corn, soybean, and pig country. This area is special because of the huge agricultural influence here, which has posed a significant challenge as it relates to climate change, water, land, and soil resources. Dr. Cruz thrives on the immense challenges and opportunities of managing interaction of climate change, soil, and water resources through agriculture. Today, he'll share a story on soil loss in agricultural flooding and drought. A few career highlights include being a co-author on many, over 100, peer-reviewed papers and publications, many book chapters, international presentations, and keynotes such as this one. So I'll turn it over to Dr. Cruz. Let's get into the soil and get dirty.
All that stuff. The other thing, full disclosure, an academic speaking without a PowerPoint is about as comfortable as a climate denier experiencing a 10-inch rainfall without an umbrella. My story starts in the backseat of an old Ford car that my father was driving through the countryside, observing the land damage that occurred following a 4-inch rainstorm. And in the 60s, that was a big rainstorm. He told me on that ride, he said, son, he said, without soils, you have nothing. Everything you have is either directly or indirectly relies on soils. I thought, Dad, yeah, I get it. We had the potatoes we had for lunch was grown in the garden. I planted them in soil. The sweet corn, the peas. Oh, my shoes? Come on, they're made of leather. Which comes from hides of cattle or something that ate corn or alfalfa that grew. It's okay. My desk at school is made of wood, which comes from trees. Okay. Well, that started my journey, and for some of you, it's hard to imagine someone would go all the way through and get a PhD studying dirt for soils. Well, the journey was important for me. Some of the things that I learned. Have you ever heard of a solar-powered atmospheric carbon extraction technology? Yeah, plant photosynthesis. In fact, that's the academic word of saying that. One of the things you may not understand or recognize the majority of what the plant does, fixing the carbon, is pumped underground. It's pumped underground. Now that's important relative to climate change components because that material, that organic material pumped underground, improves the capacity to handle resilience against the changing climate. The world's soils have more than 3 times the amount of carbon stored that exists in the atmospheric carbon pool. One of the estimates that I found in a publication called Science, which is something you will not find on the lower shelf of Walmart, indicates that if we manage the soils correctly, we manage the plant species, that includes forestry, that includes agriculture, we could handle or accommodate 5 to 15% of the global carbon emissions annually. Soils are a tool. Soils are a tool. There are a limited amount of tools. Soils are being degraded, and we can go into that. But I think the key here, and I heard it said earlier, we know what to do. Our task is developing the political will, the personal will to do it. We all have a story. Everyone here is passionate about what we're doing. Tell your story. Tell your story. Build teams that will help us all move us in the right direction. I'm happy everyone's here. Have a great conference. Happy climate adaptation. Thank you.
Thank you. It's my new pleasure to, my pleasure to introduce Serge Dina, who I've had the pleasure of knowing for a number of years and has actually served as an inspiration to me in some of my work. Maybe you don't know that, Serge, but that's true. So he's the mayor of Imperial Beach. He's also the co-founder and executive director of Wild Coast. He's the mayor of a blue-collar beach city located at the U.S.-Mexico border in California, which has unique challenges, which I know that he'll talk a little bit about. But he's leading large-scale coastal adaptation initiatives in the Gulf of California, along Baja California's Pacific shoreline. He's created a blue carbon program for mangrove management through this work with Wild Coast. And he's created the first opportunity by a city to engage in a lawsuit against the fossil fuel companies to help fund and support climate change initiatives in his community. Obviously, it's not just him, right? This is not something you can go up against as an individual, and he's going to share a little bit more about how that might work. He has a PhD in geography from the University of Texas at Austin, an MS in geography from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And he's also an author, and as resonates with me, a former ocean lifeguard, as I was as well. So, Serge, please join us up here.
Michael, I wanted to shout out to all the San Diego folks that are here. I know you have a strong, strong team from San Diego. Raise your hand. Yeah, thank you so much. Amazing team from San Diego. If you're a small town mayor, it's all about money. It's always about money, because we can change the world. We can do whatever we want, and I've got all kinds of plans, man. If you run a city where a third of the kids live in poverty, it's 4 square miles, and you became mayor, not because you wanted to do environmental work. I do conservation work, and I've been doing it my whole life. I help save every inch of open space around my city, along with my wife, Emily, who's from Madison. I didn't need to justify my environmental cred. I needed to make sure that everybody in my town had access to a grocery store, because we didn't have one. I wanted to make sure that the people lived in backs of alleys in wheelchairs. We actually paved their alleys, so when it rained, they could actually leave or get to their house. I want to make sure when kids walk to school, they actually have crosswalks so they don't get run over by a car. That was my task, and we are doing it, along with Paloma Aguirre, who's on my city council. Paloma, raise your hand. She is a total warrior, badass warrior for climate change and the environment. Thank you, Paloma. I thought we had some video, but do we have video? I think we had what keeps me awake at night is 25-foot surf, 50-mile-an-hour northwest winds, and rising seas, and king tide flooding. I thought we had video of it, but I guess we don't. We just have the video. And what my nightmare is already happening. And the issue is, how do you predict it? How do you predict it? How do you deal with it? And how do you pay for it? We're lucky that we have access to scientists of the Scripps Institution of Oceanography at UC San Diego, my alma mater, where I got my undergraduate degree, as well as scientists at NOAA's National Estuarine Research Reserve at the Tijuana Estuary, and our partners at the University of San Diego. But the folks at Scripps this year came up with a forecast tool that they're modeling in Imperial Beach. And that forecast tool is a buoy offshore, and then helping us actually predict when that king tide flooding will happen. And in January, they nailed it. We had some of the worst king tide flooding. Actually, it was the worst king tide flooding in our history. And Scripps, I think a week in advance, told us it was going to happen. They let us know so we could let the community know. Much of it happened on federal property, and the federal government was closed. They were not working. And so we had to deal with what was happening on federal property, and we had to do the cleanup afterwards. That was $15,000 to clean up after that flooding. That's money for the junior lifeguard program. That's money for the senior center. That's money for summer parks and rec program. That's money we don't have. So the question is, who pays for it? I didn't cause it. You didn't cause it. We didn't cause it. But the world's largest fossil fuel companies did. And they should pay for it. We should. So the small city of Imperial Beach, California was the first city in the world to file a climate lawsuit against 35 of the world's largest fossil fuel companies. And we were joined by Santa Cruz, Richmond, San Francisco, Oakland, New York, and the counties of Marin and San Mateo, Boulder, Baltimore, and the entire state of Rhode Island. Because this is the issue. If you're not pushing the boundaries and taking risks every day to address climate change, then you're not doing enough. If you're worried about somebody getting mad at you, or if someone said, aren't you worried about all those lawyers in $1,000 or $10,000 suits in Houston who are actually, requesting our records? No, why would I be? The worst thing that could possibly happen is already happening. They're taking money away from my kids in our community. We're spending our time dealing with climate change rather than actually making sure that our residents have access to the services they were denied for 60 years. So this is a lesson. Get shit done. Take risks. Be innovative. And you know what? Never apologize, ever, for doing your job. Thank you very much, and have a great conference.
You said it was going to be high energy.
Is everybody pumped up yet?
Yeah, is there coffee still in the coffee bench back there? Well, okay. Well, this is a great start to a discussion that we're now going to have with our panelists on kind of what drives them, what makes a difference in their world, how they see the future ahead of us. And so I grew up in Florida. I grew up in Central Florida, a little town called DeLand, not DeWater. Sorry, it's a Florida joke. And went to school at Florida State University. And my sophomore year of college was really the year that I woke up to the issue of climate change. It was 2002, kind of dates me. And I was reading Al Gore's book, Earth and the Balance. It was an assignment from my geosciences professor. I read this book and it changed the trajectory of my life, right? And all of us have that moment. All of us in this room have that moment, even if it was when they were 1 year old, right? There's some point in your life where you decided, okay, my path has been chosen for me, or I've chosen one way or the other. So I guess my question would be to all of you was, when was that moment? When was that moment in your life where you saw that this was the path forward, that this is a kind of the issue of our time that you needed to be working on? And obviously, all of you are doing amazing things across so many different areas, but around this specific issue. And then just one point on what do you think the biggest impact you're making now related to that? And anybody who's hungry and eager to go can go for it.
Okay, then
I think for me it happened when early 2000s when I got involved, as I mentioned, Black Mesa Water Coalition. It was an opportunity for me to go beyond my community of the Hopi Nation, which is in northern Arizona. And at that time, we had attended an Indigenous mining summit in Skokomish, Wisconsin, which is up north, and a lot of the tribes up there were facing issues with their wild rice, and looking at how climate disruptions versus climate change is really impacting traditional sustainable harvesting and just our way of life, and in order for us to be protective of our way of life, and again that goes to our ceremonies, it goes to our songs, it goes to our language, it goes to the very essence of who we are because of our connection to the land, to Mother Earth, and who we are. So for me at that point was very pivotal because here I was, a 20-something-year-old young Hopi woman in Wisconsin where I've never been, listening to these issues on mining and knowing that I come from a coal mining company or coal mining community as well, and just seeing the impacts that were occurring, will occur, and that have occurred. Like for Hopi now, after 60 some odd years of extensive pumping from Peabody Coal Company, we now have arsenic in our drinking water wells, and arsenic is naturally forming, and we don't have any pesticides or any heavy industrial type of facility out in our community. And so for me at that point in time, I don't know if perhaps maybe it was the Creator giving me a calling or what, but at that point in time, I just took it upon myself to really immerse myself into the issues as far as what we have to deal with as tribal nations and as indigenous communities here in the United States of America, because we're the only tribes, we're the only people that have to live on reservations. We're the only people that have to adhere to federal Indian law and policy, and this really dictates a lot of what we do as far as our climate adaptation and our other efforts that we're trying to do within our communities, because we still in the 21st century are considered wards of the federal government, which is something that dated back to the 1800s in the Marshall Trilogies. So again, for me, knowing that and knowing my place here, sitting at this forum, I have the ability to speak on that and to raise these issues because of the fact that they do undermine who we are as indigenous peoples, and we are fighting every day to make that stand and to show we are the original inhabitants of this land, and you guys should work better with us to
Just like my sister here, I believe the moment in time that we're looking for that really told me I needed to get in here and crack my teeth like that for these other rest of people on stand, we still there. There's a statement in Gullah, Geechee, we said, we'd have been here, we ain't going away. Okay, and so we are the original people of the land. So the Yamasee, the Kusabo, the Adisto were our indigenous ancestors that were already here in North America, and then our African ancestors were brought and placed on the Sea Islands to enslave us, to colonize us, to work the land. But now, cotton is no longer king, the tide is. And even though my entire family, many of whom you saw in the slides here, worked the land and worked from the water. And I always tell people, our culture is inextricably tied to the land and the water. We say, water to bring me the water, going to take me back. And so we're literally seeing the water taking people back to what were our traditions, but people call it New Age. Or people now use the terms adaptation, resilience. We're like, what are you talking about? This is how we live, okay? But there was no one in the arena that understood us when we spoke. And most of the time, they said, well, you all are emotional natives. And I said, really? So I've studied engineering, computer science, mathematics, graduated with honors, won numerous awards for soil conservation, all of this, and yet I'm only an emotional native. Well, I guess because all my culture has been covered up in speaking your way. So let me throw them down like this and see if I know say I didn't hear opinion. Oh, who are y'all? Gullah Geechee. We read about you. We read of your people. We thought you were gone. So at the point that someone said that to me, and it felt like someone punched me in my chest, I said, okay, I see why you have me doing this work. Where I could have had on a nice big sweater in a nice computer lab, making 6 figures instead. You said, get back on the land, farm it, speak about it, and show people how to live on it, because there is a balance that they don't understand. And so that's why I know I do this for the reasons that God ordained it for this moment in time. I would have never thought writing essays on soil conservation and speaking about it, I won't date myself how long ago that was, would ever lead to forums like this. But at least it's been beneficial because people can hear our story and know how we can work together so that we all heal the land. And that's not New Age, that's just a reality that we all need to do.
That is one tough act to follow. My voila moment occurred when a climate scientist, I can speak academic because I'll give you a little bit, okay. Geechee, who I admired and respected immensely, struggled with the whole issue of climate change until one day, the climate models he was working on used a feedback mechanism. He said, we nailed it. He says the previous models couldn't backcast or match what was being observed. But now we can. And then he started talking about what those models are telling us are going to happen. And not only was it a voila moment, it was a very scary moment. Now what drives me is connecting dots between different issues. So we have a rising population, everyone knows, which means food demand is going to go up. We have a degrading soil resource. I mean, soil is not life. Globally, in the U.S., not only degradation, in the 25-year period, 1982 to 2007, we converted 41 million acres of agricultural land to non-ag uses. That's an area bigger than Iowa. Globally, we're going to convert 70%. We need someplace to put the additional 1.5 to 2 billion people. So connect the rising demand, degraded soil resources, and now add climate change to these issues. And what does that tell us about food security in the future? I have another good colleague, Pete Nowak, who continually reminds me, productivity is not driven by averages, it is limited by extremes. Biology is limited by extremes. And what is it that we're most fearful of in our climate change arena? It is the extreme events. I'm driven by hopefully helping our future generations. I apologize to them for what my generation has already done. But now the issue is moving forward. We have the tools, let's just do it.
So I was lucky that as an undergrad at UC San Diego, I was exposed to the work of Roger Revelle, who was one of the early teams of scientists that really started talking about the impact of carbon in the atmosphere for our planet. And then, more importantly, here in my first semester at the University of Wisconsin, I was I had a class with Diana Lieberman, who's now at the University of Arizona, who's a very, very important person in the field of sort of human impacts of climate change. And that included a lecture by Dr. Stephen Schneider, who was at the University of Colorado Boulder, and really talking about a popular book that was published at the time, really eye-opening, talking about the impacts of climate change. But it really hit me something I've been cognizant about working in Baja California and the Pacific coast of Mexico, and seeing incremental sea level rise happen in these very sort of flat salt marsh ecosystems, right? Very undeveloped, undisturbed areas that when you really see the incremental impacts on mangrove ecosystems and salt marshes, and the fishermen and their families have they're not concerned about talking about it, right? They really see it, and they're really, really, like, explaining it, right? But it really, really hit me, I think, in the El Nino events of 2014, sort of 2015 in California, and then more recently, where we essentially had tropical ecosystems off the California coastline, where we had 80-degree water temperatures off the ocean in San Diego this year. I've been obsessively, as a surfer, been documenting the ocean since 1977 when I first started surfing. We've never had 80-degree water temperatures. We've never had schools of hammerhead sharks and whale sharks off the San Diego coast like we've had recently. And so that really opened my eyes. But it was really in my hometown of Imperial Beach and seeing the impact of king tides. Again, we've had king tides my whole life. We've had high tides. We've had surf. I've never seen the type of flooding that I saw this year and in recent years with just above average surf and king tides. not just on our beachfront, but on our bayfront. We had the highest tides in our city's history, San Diego Bay's history, with the kind of flooding we've actually never had before. So I've seen it, we're experiencing it, and really, I think what's really motivated me is this idea about natural climate solutions and making sure that we're really evangelizing about, protecting our soil, protecting our native ecosystems, our natural ecosystems, and using nature instead of working against it. That's really something that's really driving me.
Wonderful. Let's see if this mic goes on. Can you hear me? Thank you. Wonderful. Thank you for that. So we've heard a little bit about what kind of got everyone's passion started, what got everyone motivated to work on this incredibly challenging and somewhat exhausting issue. I spend a lot of time working on kind of formal adaptation knowledge, reports, publications, etc. But what I often hear from folks is while these reports and this really kind of formal knowledge is useful and it does provide a great framework and a great place to start, a lot of what it takes to get adaptation done in our own job functions, whether that be at an agency or in a company, whatever it may be, is this informal knowledge, the kind of how to get things done, or I call it the adaptation know-how. So I just want all of our speakers to kind of think through this question. What's something that and it can be incredibly granular or incredibly scientific and focus, or a lot of it's people skills or things that have actually helped you actually move your work forward. So if you can maybe think through kind of what's something you can share with your colleagues that's actually really helped you move the dial forward in your own work.
My dad taught me a lesson. He says when you pick a fight, two things. Number one, make sure it's worth fighting. And number two, make sure it's something that you can win. If those two are not aligned, don't engage. The other thing I've learned is that there's a bell-shaped curve for almost everything. When you're dealing with, in my case, farmers because they're incredibly independent, but there still is a bell-shaped curve relative to their attitudes towards managing natural resources in a way that's favorable. Okay, so put the other parts together. Is a fight worth fighting? Climate change absolutely is. Is it one we can win? If you deal with this bell-shaped curve, the end of it, where you're dealing with people that absolutely won't listen, forget it. Go to the other end of the curve, you have people hungry to work with you, and they can help build that coalition with you to help move the rest of this bell-shaped curve forward. Work with people that will help build a team, and just do it.
Going off of what Richard just said, I definitely believe in partnerships and relationship buildings, because I know for a fact that I can't do this myself. Climate change, the issues that we're dealing with and addressing with are so monumental in this day and age that it's really cumbersome to really navigate your way through the plethora of information that's out there, where when you take all that information back to a little community in New Mexico, to a Pueblo community that's traditional, that's based off the environment, based off the land, how do you start to use words such as adaptation? How do you start to use words such as vulnerability assessment? How do you really take all the scientific hoo-ha, or whatever you want to call it, and really make it make sense to a community that is deeply rooted in tradition, deeply rooted in history? What do you do to get people to understand that correlation between the scientific understanding of climate impacts to what they see traditionally happen as they go out and they plow their field for another planting season, as they go out to harvest wood to heat their homes in the winter, as they look for other traditional ways of being, as far as going out and collecting wild celery, wild onions, being a part of the land just as much as the land is part of us. How do you actually do that? So for me, when it comes to that, it's working deeply with my community, because my community knows their community best. I'm not from San Domingo, but I am Pueblo from Hopi, so I do understand that connection and that correlation that we have as far as our relationships concerned. And for me, it's very important to have that community support, that community involvement, and that relationship with everybody from our governor to our tribal officials to our church leaders, down to my co-workers who are from the community themselves, even to the kids, really understanding the full dynamics of who we are as Indigenous peoples and carrying that forward. And as we build working relationships, not just amongst each other as Pueblo nations or as tribal nations, Indigenous peoples, but as other nations coming together to address climate change, to address climate disruptions such as wildfires, drought, flooding, and how these ultimately impact us from within our community out. So that's kind of my perspective of it, is really having that working relationship to better build our capacity to address this issue collectively.
As a cultural traditionalist who's also a scientist, I find myself dealing with the word translation. So when you talk about those reports, those scientific reports, I'm that person that might actually sit there and read that 60-page report and not just the one-page summary, right? And then look at it and say, well, this language is techno-speak. So even though I could communicate in this language if I were sitting with other scientists, my mother don't want to hear that, okay? And because it'll bore her to death. So I need to then break this down so that we can build up front. And so I feel like that's the methodology that's moved forward, the work that I'm able to do, as being that translator between the two worlds. And so that's one of the things that I hear a lot in these kind of forums is messaging, but then people don't move out of their box or their circle to change the message, to realize that everybody doesn't speak the same language. So if you're going into another community, then you need to learn the language of that community, and you need to translate those reports into things that are going to be concrete to people and that connect to them right on the land where they are. And I think if you incorporate people's traditions and community and culture into that work, it's an automatic connection. I often say the word community to me means that it unifies us what we have in common. So if we're not even speaking the same language, obviously we're not connected and we're not community.
So for my team at Wild Coast, when we work throughout the Pacific coast of Mexico on big, large-scale climate adaptation programs, and the work in Imperial Beach as mayor, my focus has always been not being against things, and really this climate lawsuit. My career has not been about filing lawsuits; it's about saving nature, right, and figuring out innovative ways to do that. But we've always been evangelists about taking sort of doing new things and not waiting for someone to give us permission to do it. And so that was really the effort to do blue carbon and launch a blue carbon initiative in Mexico, the first of its kind. Wasn't about waiting for someone to give us permission to do it, but saying, this is important to do because we need to create these financial incentives for communities and governments to actually do the kind of things we always want to do, which is save nature. And so we had the opportunity actually 10 years ago to work in a German government finance program to actually do large-scale conservation concessions for huge, vast areas of the Mexican Pacific coastline for mangroves and other wetland ecosystems. And at the time, a lot of our funders and partners said this is a waste of time. Why are you guys talking about climate adaptation, storm prevention, sea level rise adaptation? We're focused on biodiversity. And obviously, we're all focused on all those things. And we kept moving forward. And then that turned into a blue carbon program that's been adopted at the highest levels of the Mexican government, because all of a sudden, unlike in the United States, Mexico believes in climate change, or at least the federal government does, I'm sorry. And so they've been very, very driven by that. So that's been really rewarding. And then finally, we took that same model and took our Mexican scientists and practitioners from Mexico to San Diego to talk to the Port of San Diego, for example, about doing the first ever blue carbon project in San Diego, maybe Southern California or even California. So I think evangelizing, but having a team behind you that can get things done and are honest brokers and good partners can go a long way to actually making this work, but also really being smart about those financial mechanisms that can help communities figure this out.
Oh, thank you. And so I think we're out of time now, but what I think maybe what we can do is, in addition to me correcting the record, just a second, it was 1992, not 2002. And I was a sophomore in high school, not a sophomore in college. So I'm not that young. Is to maybe take 5 words or less and explain, hard to explain something in 5 words or less, but when you think about when you're rolling out of bed in the morning, you're waking up, and you're getting ready to go start your day, 5 words or less, what is really motivating you to get out of bed? What is the most exciting thing you're looking forward to? I mean, for me, it's partnerships and the people I work with.
Helping others make themselves better.
Building that connectedness with my community of like-minded people.
Leaving the world a better place than when I got here.
Enjoying nature every day, being outside, and not on my phone.
I think one of the things I've enjoyed just from the few hours we've already been at the National Adaptation Forum, past 5 words, I failed, is hearing these stories of how everyone's actually learned from each other. You know, just how one person has built off another person's success, taken that lesson and actually moved on. I think that the collective network we have here in Fabric that is quite inspiring. Michael?
That's a great 5 words.
Not great at counting.
Yeah, so I think you know, from the stories we hear today, take them forward as you're going through the week, and make sure you don't forget to tell your own stories with the people you interact here. Create a story that resonates with the people that you work with on a daily basis in the environment that you work. Some of us work in really challenging environments at some times. Others are working in extremely collaborative and supportive environments. The secret is that we all work together to support each other. That's the intent of these forums, are to learn, build a network, move forward together through the year, and continue to work with each other after this. So take this energy that you're creating and building this week and move it forward, and let's make sure we're all successful together.